Bienvenidos al episodio Sin pelos en el cactus, episodio 60, con un invitado especial, el doctor Darren Campbell, que nos va a dar una cátedra sobre lo que viene siendo la creatina. El doctor Campbell es una de las voces más importantes ahorita sobre las investigaciones, publicaciones de la creatina, y les van a dejar aquí una cantidad de conocimiento que en pocos lugares van a encontrar. Va a estar en inglés el podcast, pero ya saben que si se van a YouTube pueden agarrar los subtítulos y todo. Así que vamos a empezar. Darren, tremendous pleasure having you here. I greatly appreciate you having the time to educate us and tell us all the let's breaking myths, and let's getting new information and getting the record straight on creatine. So if you don't mind, I just you can present a little bit about yourself to the community, and we'll get it started.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I know we've tried to schedule this in a few times, so super excited to be here with you today. And thanks for the warm words and introduction. My name is Darren Kando. I'm a professor at the University of Regina in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. I'm also the director of the Aging Muscle and Bone Health Lab. And over the course of my schooling and career, we've really tried to focus on nutritional interventions, primarily creatine monohydrate and exercise. And primarily there, it is weight training, but we're starting to introduce cardiovascular exercise, trying to optimize body composition, moving into bone and muscle, and now into brain health, especially with creatine. And as you mentioned, creatine has exploded ever since the late 1990s. And I'm very fortunate to be working with some world leaders in that area. And we'll talk about everything from pregnancy all the way up to aging and look at different bone areas, some myths, lots of popular things in the media. And then some things to consider, around the timing, the dosage, which forms of creatine. So really happy to be here with you today, and let's get it going, I guess.
So I have like a timeline or whatever you want to call it of how to approach this. But a question: how did you get involved with this? What was the first thing that was like, look, this is interesting? Where did this interest come from?
Yeah, it was by chance, and I think a lot of academics are by chance. So when I was doing my master's degree under Dr. Phil Chillibeck, who's at the University of Saskatchewan, and Phil's a world-renowned researcher in many areas. But at the time, we were looking at glutamine, the non-essential amino acid, and in the early 2000s, it was touted to be sort of a miracle cure. Glutamine was being used by a lot of people, and we thought, okay, could glutamine actually improve muscle mass, strength, and reduce protein breakdown? And we gave a very, very high dose into young university individuals. And after 6 weeks of training, it did nothing. And so, you can imagine a young master's student going in and saying, okay, I want to find benefits, and not finding anything. And I remember at the time my mentor said, finding null effects is just as important as finding significance, because that might be more important for someone that's going out and purchasing it using their hard-earned money to buy something. And our study now has been cited, hundreds of times, but at the time as a student, you're really dejected. And at the same time, I had a good colleague, another fantastic mentor, Dr. Darren Burke. He was doing his PhD on creatine. And while I was doing a very similar population, we started to notice his individuals, placebo and or creatine, the exercise program was very effective. But when you looked at the data, the individuals on creatine were getting bigger, stronger, faster. And that was starting to be replicated worldwide. Paul Greenhalgh was doing seminal work in the UK, Mark Tarnopolsky here in Canada, and many others, Bruno Gualiano in Brazil. And it started to see, wow, creatine, even in the late 1990s, started to cause an improvement in body composition. And then that sort of related or triggered something in me, which populations might benefit from having more muscle mass, strength, and performance. And that's probably why I pivoted into aging. And I did my PhD looking at creatine and protein in older individuals. And it's exploded into a global phenomenon, so to speak, where there's excellent research looking at it in pregnancy, childhood development, of course, adults, in the elderly, and then in the brain. So by accident and a null finding with glutamine, I sort of pivoted into something that I think has a lot more effective results.
I've been following this closely. That pregnancy one is going to grab my attention because that
Yes.
one is a new one for me. Because a lot of the things that I stumble upon my patients that if they go to the GYN and they're pregnant, the first thing that they do is they stop the creatine. So
Yes.
this is going to be a cool one.
Yeah,
So
and I think that's one of the top 5 areas to look for the next 2 decades. Stacey Ellery out of Beacon University in Australia is the world leader there, and she's doing phenomenal research. They've used the animal model, but now they're getting into humans, not only for the mother, but now potentially looking at breast feeding and the transition of creatine into the milk, and then getting it to the fetus and placenta. So we never in our wildest dreams would have thought a supplement that was theorized just for young males now has potential health aspects for anybody on the planet, yeah.
yeah, it seems like the typical joke that it should be in the water, you know.
Yeah, pretty much for that.
So, can you explain to our audience what creatine is and why such a big deal with it?
Yeah, sure. So creatine was this, it was discovered in 1832, if you can imagine, actually before ATP or adenosine triphosphate. And anybody listening has heard of ATP for sure. It's the energy currency of all our cells, especially muscle fibers. So when we're exercising, carrying groceries, taking out the trash, whichever it is, our muscles require ATP to allow that movement or work to occur. And unfortunately, we have a limited amount of ATP or potential energy in our cells. And the way we maintain that level is phosphocreatine or creatine comes to the aid first. So a lot of people have heard of carbohydrates being broken down in glycolysis or fats, proteins, and carbohydrates through oxidative phosphorylation. But really rapid movements, a 100-meter sprint, the second set of a bench press, phosphocreatine sort of sacrifices itself to help maintain ATP. So the analogy is I say if ATP is Batman, Robin is creatine. They go hand in hand and they're really good at maintaining the level. So, for example, if you have more creatine in your muscle, it's been repeatedly shown that you can perform more work, either an improvement in strength, repetitions, or so on. Not so much the first set, but if you did multiple sets of leg press, chest press, or whichever, that's where creatine really seems to come into play. It allows you to recover quicker, and maybe you can do more work in sets 2, 3, and 4. And obviously, over weeks and months, that's probably where the physiological adaptations are occurring. A creatine is not a steroid, it's simply a nitrogen containing compound we naturally produce in the body, in the liver, and the brain. We could also consume a very small amount in animal based flesh, so red meat, white meat, and seafood. So, anybody listening that's a vegan, vegetarian, or even emphasizing a plant based diet, they're hardly getting any exogenous creatine through food. So, they're relying on what's being produced in the body. But most people are familiar with creatine supplementation, and that's simply taking the creatine molecule, and if it's monohydrate, it's identical to what's being synthesized in the liver and the brain there. There's many other mechanisms of how it works, but in theory, it sort of allows more ATP to be utilized and recycled to do more work.
Is there an upregulation system now that you mention it, for example, on vegans that they're not getting it, I mean, their body would produce actually more than the non-vegans? Or
That's a really excellent question. Not been shown directly, but the theory is that they're more sensitive. So maybe that would help explain by the small body of research, but it is there, randomized control trials. When you give a vegan creatine monohydrate, they respond probably the best of anybody on the planet.
wow.
Whereas you would expect a carnivore would have the least responsive because they're already getting so much. So obviously, that's why some of the seminal studies we did one in 2001, and vegans responded exceptionally well. They got an increase in muscle creatine levels, which correlated into performance benefits. Um, so the nice thing is there, you're starting to look at segments of the population for whatever reason they are vegan, vegetarian, or carnivore, whichever it is. But vegans really do respond. And I like your analogy. Maybe they're just more sensitive to creatine because they're not getting it any through the diet that they could utilize more.
So in other words, if you're vegan or you're vegetarian, you should be taking creatine. I mean, it's like a no-brainer in that one, it seems, huh?
And another thing, Serge Ostiak is out of Norway, one of the world's best creatine researchers, and he's looked at NHANES data. And if you're getting less than 1 gram in your diet, you have a greater risk of some adverse effects. So that's where I start to look at the vegan population. plant-based diets, or females who don't typically eat as much meat, that's where supplementation can be considered. Keep in mind, the best creatines in the world, Creapure, in my opinion, is the world's best from Germany. It's vegan-based, so again, it is something that can fit into a lot of people's repertoire, so to speak.
Well, now that I mean, I think the question was going to come a little bit later, but you said CreaPure. I've seen that, I mean, I've asked this question in social media, and I end up with a conclusion or from other PhDs that anything that has NSF certification. So is that right? Or, I mean, so what can make, for example, in your case, a CreaPure be be your choice? Why was it so special?
There's a couple things. So Creapure has the purity and contaminants. So purity is almost 100%, contaminants are zero. It always has certified safe, and it's creatine monohydrate, which is really important. There's a lot of other market forms out there which we can talk about. I think a lot of people should save their money and stick to creatine monohydrate because it's the safest and most effective. But if you see a product that has Creapure, you can rest assured. I've been to the plant in Germany. The scrutiny behind that chemical compound is unbelievable, and it's some of the most purest. And it's the only form that has GRAS status by the FDA, generally recognized as safe.
Oh, that's cool. And one of the things that, I mean, I've tried multiple, I mean, creatines, and I mean, I deviated a little bit, but I think that it's relevant because I've tried multiple brands with NSF certification. Some just, I mean, they taste more grainy. Other ones are just give me nausea when other ones they dissolve like if it's like powder, you know?
Yes.
So if they're all supposed good brands, what makes, I mean, is it just the process is or my other thing, my question that I've had is if this dissolves really easily in water, would that be more easily absorbable?
Yeah, so that's all good points. So the going back to Creapure, the purity and the safety technicalities that are there is unprecedented. If it dissolves really, really easily in water, it's probably ultra filter micronized, and there's many products that are starting to move that way because a lot of people say they didn't like the grittiness at the end of the
Yeah.
cup. Sometimes, and so whatever works well, but the more micronized it is, the easier it is to dissolve. The dissolvability will not affect the bioavailability in the body. So the GI tract has hydrochloric acid; it explodes most things. Creatine's unique; it remains intact. It's sort of protected because the pH of the stomach's a bit too low, and it will get into circulation intact, which is very, very nice. So you can take the powder. There's a lot of other delivery forms out there, but a lot of people may not know this. You do not need to necessarily mix your creatine in solution. So a lot of people say, "Oh, I hate putting it in water," or "Can I put it in orange juice?" I'm like, "You can put it in anything." I personally mix half my dose in Greek yogurt in the morning. So there's no interference effect. You can put creatine with food, and if anything, for those listening that are a little hesitant, I would advise you to put it with food because you get all the other macronutrients which stimulate uptake, protein and carbohydrates, and there's no taste to creatine. You won't notice it. So I put about 5 to 7 grams in my Greek yogurt in the morning, and that's a piece of cake. And then I drink another 5 to 10 grams during my workout. So a lot of people may not know that you can drink it after every set or whichever it is. It's another way to get it in. The timing doesn't really matter. It's the consistency.
So scrambled eggs as they go, huh? So
Everything. Yeah. And now, the only thing that is a caveat is high heat.
okay.
So the more heat it is, it can break creatine down quicker to creatinine. But if you want to put it into a room temperature, a solution, or slightly elevated, that can improve the bioavailability and absorption a little bit better.
Well, that's gonna be this that you just made. It's gonna be an interesting point when we get to the kids, you know.
Yep.
So how to give it to them and why to give it to them. Now, I guess a question would be if the body is producing it,
Yep.
why doesn't it produce so much? Why would we need to
Yeah.
be supplementing? I mean, it's like our body is an intelligent system. So, any theories, hypothesis here?
Yeah, that's another excellent question. We don't really know. The best guess is that from a whole body perspective, we're producing about 1 to 3 grams on average. And the majority of that we think is in the liver. But again, the brain is making its own creatine as well. We don't know why there's a max capacity. The theory, though, is that 95% of your creatine is stored in skeletal muscle. So, as you mentioned, the body is very efficient. Once the muscle is full, why keep producing it if we're going to be excreting more down the toilet through the renal system? But now there's an evolution with creatine research. We now know that the bone, cardiovascular system, and the brain does utilize creatine. And that's likely why I'm one of the champions of saying we probably need a bit more. Creatine is not an essential nutrient unless you're born with an inborn creatine synthesis deficiency. But a lot of us are in the camp that is conditionally essential. And what I mean by that is, of course, vegans, vegetarians, they live a long, healthy, successful life. But there's so much evidence to suggest a slightly higher amount can have other benefits that they may not be getting at the same rate. So again, we're not talking like protein hundreds of grams. We're talking maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 grams, a couple teaspoons in the run of a day. So again, it's a viable suggestion. It may not be for everybody, but my job is to provide unbiased, evidence-based research around all the facets around the evidence.
Okay. Um, Well, so I think what we're gonna be doing, and of course you can take it wherever you want,
Yep.
but I mean it's talking about muscle, bone health, brain,
Yep.
cognitive function, right? Women's health right now. It's very interesting with the pregnancy. I'm very interested again with potential benefits with kids. For example, I'm now that I see these trials going on with higher dosages of creatine, and I mean. I start thinking about, is there a potential, for example, in ADHD kids or stuff like this, because we've seen diet have tremendous impact on kids. So all these things are questions that our audience has, and so do I. So I guess we can start. I mean, wherever you want. I mean, there's so many points. We can start with what we know, I guess, or the most frequent one, which is muscle. And
Yes.
then we start going on to the what like the more mind blowing ones, which are for me, because this kind of we do not know, or the audience possibly does not know the mechanism. But so how does create? I mean, you were telling us about the reps and that. So it used to be 5 grams per day, or you had the loading dose. That seems is being kind of changing lately. I mean, all the way up to 20 grams. For me, my impression is 20 grams it's like where maybe your stuff, but
Mhm.
it seems like the sweet spot to what I've heard is at 10. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so give us your take on muscle.
Yeah.
I mean, what type of exercises, aerobic, non-aerobic, any type? What's the take on this?
Yeah, so I think the inception of creatine comes from muscle. I think that's where it was for athletes to get bigger, stronger, faster. So there's a lot of things we know about creatine, and the most robust evidence is around muscle. So anywhere from 3 grams all the way up to 20, as you mentioned, is a very viable range to get muscle improvements. For those that do not want to take 20 grams a day for the first 5 or 7 days, that's called the loading phase. But by the way, that's the most rapid way to fill up your muscle. You can do as little as 3 grams a day. So the nice thing with skeletal muscle, there's a wide range, and anybody can sort of choose in between. That's likely why 5 grams is a very viable source. But there's about 5 things that creatine in combination with exercise, primarily weight training, has been repeatedly shown. You should expect an improvement in lean mass. You can expect a small improvement in regional muscle. That would be like bicep or tricep muscle size. It's not great, but it is there. Lean mass on average is about 1.3 kilograms. Now, everybody says, wow, 1.3 kilograms is a lot, but there's a lot of big caution here. A lot of people are not going to like me for this if they're in the creatine camp. Lean mass encompasses a lot of things in the body. One of the components is muscle, but you have connective tissue, organ, blood, plasma, everything else. So a really good paper came out, and no study ever measures muscle, by the way, is that we think at best half of that is muscle. So if you go back 1.3 kilograms on average, now we're in the camp of saying, hey, after 6 weeks or more weight training, I put on about 700 grams of muscles, or equivalent to 2 chicken breasts. So for the young individual, they're like, okay, I'm willing to buy that. For the older adult, that's important because they're losing muscle. We're not only saying we're stopping a loss, we're actually getting an increase. I still think that's very beneficial. And obviously, the more lean mass you have, it's the biggest area for glucose disposal to offset metabolic conditions. The most robust, powerful evidence comes from performance. Creatine repeatedly has been shown to improve strength. That's in the upper and lower body. It also has some improvements in other areas such as endurance and power. And a big area that we often overlook is recovery. There's been many studies now to suggest that you will recover faster after each workout. That could allow the average individual, the elite athlete, to maintain more frequency. And it improves also measures of functionality in the gym. It also is starting to emerge now. It has beneficial effects for aerobic exercise, which is something new. We always thought it was only for weight training individuals, and there's been a couple excellent studies looking at Ironman and ultra marathon, where those took 20 grams a day for 5 days before the long duration race. It did not improve their performance, but what it did do is decrease inflammation after the race compared to placebo. So that body going through, 40, 50 kilometers of exercise is going to have a lot of inflammation. Creatine seemed to attenuate the rate of inflammatory markers, which could allow that individual to get back to training more often. And then we put out a paper 2 years ago looking at swimming, skating, all types of aerobic activities, and creatine has some beneficial effects there from a hydration perspective. That's a big myth, by the way. It doesn't dehydrate you, it actually superhydrates the muscle. So for those exercising in hotter environments, creatine would be advantageous, but it also has improvements in agility, balance, and some skill performance for sports. So it's gone away from just weights to actually having application for a lot of athletic events from a muscle perspective.
So if it's helping replenish your ATP,
Mhm.
I guess then this would be not so much for the sprinter, but for the marathon runner. Would that be right?
Potentially. Now, if you do multiple sprints, that's where it comes into play, but ATP is just one of the biggest mechanisms. There's actually about 9 others from a muscle perspective. So, there's been a series of studies where creatine not only does it improve calcium and glycogen kinetics, which has implications for all muscle contractions, but it increases satellite cells, insulin-like growth factor for muscle performance and recovery. It decreases cytokines, so speeds up inflammation. So we consider creatine from a muscle perspective to have anabolic and
You said
anti-catabolic
speeds up
effects.
inflammation or decreases inflammation?
Decreases inflammation. So after the exercise, cytokines are suppressed, and it actually has been shown to decrease primarily in males. We're not sure why there's a sex difference. Muscle protein breakdown will go down in older males and younger males as well. So there's something there, but I think look at creatine as a small adjunct to have anabolic and anti-catabolic effects.
So is creatine anti-inflammatory?
It is considered now in rodent model and in human model. There's best evidence in the rodent model, but decreasing oxidative stress and having some of those reductions in cytokines is sort of considering an anti-inflammatory properties.
One of the cool things that I've seen by speaking with different people here in the
Mhm.
podcast from different fields is that I have found that, for example, Christopher Palmer with brain energy
Yes.
psychiatry, it's inflammation here. Then you've got dermatology, inflammation here, and then cardiology, we've got inflammation everywhere. We TNF, IL-6,
Yeah.
and it's like you start finding this pattern, which kind of makes me wonder. I mean, because when you start eating well, you start improving your sleep, you start meditating. I mean, the C-reactive protein and all these things start coming down.
It's
So, and so one like, if we go to rheumatology, then we've got psoriasis, we've got lupus, we've got
right.
joints and stuff, and everything starts getting better when you start changing your lifestyle. But now it seems that there's this potential, which I'm gonna be digging into,
Yeah.
this anti-inflammatory property that you're mentioning,
A-
which
And that's one of the biggest properties we think why it has brain benefits.
wow, that's amazing. That's pretty cool. Anybody doing any work with that? I mean, it's like, of course.
Yeah, we're starting to see a lot more emergence on homocysteine, and then some of these cytokines that you just mentioned, IL-6, TNF, and CRP were the ones that the studies looked at ultra marathon as well as a marathon. Can creatine be combined with an anti-inflammatory drug like Advil or something and have a superior effect? We don't know. And to your point, one of the biggest causes of sarcopenia is age-related inflammation.
Wow.
And so there's the whole different camp saying coffee has so many antioxidants. You get benefits from coffee. How can we get more antioxidants in the Western traditional diet? Everything is processed, fast food, things like that. So we're trying to come up with ideas or at least information to provide people to live longer free of disease.
That's pretty cool. One of the things that I mean, I'm a I mean, I love ketogenic diet, but a well-formulated one, for example, and I say a modified Mediterranean diet with fasting and stuff that also decreases inflammation. One of the things that I've read, and I truly believe that there's a big point here is with BHB being impacting the inflammasome, the NLPR3 inflammasome.
Okay. Yep.
So, I mean, it's like we've got a molecule that is decreasing inflammation, but we're focusing all these different things that can decrease inflammation. People start feeling better. I mean, even with insulin resistance, there's an inflammatory process, which, I mean, I've got ADD. So, by the way, so if we're talking about inflammation and the inflammatory processes are in insulin resistance, anything here that shows creatine could actually impact some way that
Yeah, so the interesting thing is we put out a couple reviews and it seems like weight training session isn't
your
inflammatory enough.
your mic is sounding weird. Small break, gente. We're back. I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. So we were talking about inflammation. Let's take it from there, Darren.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's an emerging area, especially for the aging body as we get older. And I think the big push here is on the anti-inflammatory response to lack of antioxidants in the Western traditional diet, highly processed foods, things like that. But one of the main mechanisms when you look at accelerated aging and then into cognition is inflammation. And creatine is starting to have these anti-inflammatory effects. They're small and emerging. We need a lot more clinical data, but I think it's also one of the mechanisms to consider when we look at brain health.
Well, an interesting thing that you were mentioning right now about coffee and
Yes.
inflammation. Well, we get the thing that you should not be taking creatine if you're drinking coffee. What about that
Yes.
one?
Yeah, that one's a bit of a touchy area, and I've really looked at this because we actually performed the only training study looking at anhydrogenous caffeine powder and creatine. So there's a couple things to spin from this. If the dose of caffeine is likely less than 300 milligrams, I think it should be totally fine if you want to combine creatine and caffeine, like, for example, putting your creatine in tea or coffee. The best data comes from the UK, and when the dose is higher, about 5 milligrams per kilogram of your body weight, that seems to have an interference effect. One of the areas the interference is around calcium at something called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, but that's only from a muscle relaxation standpoint. We've done another study where higher dose caffeine, about the same dosage, did seem to blunt the effects of creatine. So to put it in summary, I think if your coffee, tea, whichever it is less than 300 milligrams, which most are, I don't think you need to worry about it. But if you're putting it in a very, very highly caffeinated hot beverage and you're sipping on it all day long and then reheating it in the microwave and reheating it, it may cause some degradation or interference effects there. But at the end of the day, caffeine and creatine, they're synergistic in some ways. They oppose each other in some ways. But the dose of caffeine seems to play a role. And again, let's piggyback. The dose of creatine has also been implicated. So very, very high dose of creatine may cause more of an interference effect on caffeine side compared to a low dose.
Okay, interesting. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Um, so we could actually argue that the temperature would also be impacting in this thing, but I mean, I think that the effect would be minuscule. I mean, if we
Very,
talk about
very minuscule. Even at boiling, it will have some accelerated degradation, but at room temperature, slightly heated, that's fine as well. If anything, that would actually increase the solubility in the solution, and then that'll actually improve bioavailability per se, not having a net effect over time.
right now that when you were speaking about the creatine and muscle and exercise, well, what about those older individuals that
Mhm.
are not training that hard?
Yes.
Or let's say that the debilitated patient who got atrophy because he was laying on bed for, I don't know, a month and he's just weak as can be.
Yes.
Well, he's not gonna be doing that much, but what would the improvement be here? I mean, is there anything showing that, or I mean,
Yeah.
that they should be taking it, or what's the take on that one?
Yeah, there's some very good news. So the vast majority of the benefits when you get to muscle and even into elderly and at 50, 60, 70 years in age is when creatine is combined with weight training. So if the individual is able to exercise, that has to be foundational as the driving force. But there's also a very small body of research that clearly shows that creatine without exercise can have beneficial effects in the aging population. And you've hit the nail on the head. What if they have immobilization issues, comorbidities, arthritis, they can't lift heavy weights? I think there's good news that creatine elevating the energy capacity of your cell can cause improvements in functionality and or muscle performance. You're not going to get an improvement in muscle mass because you're not doing the weight training, but there has been a few studies showing that you get an improvement in muscle force generation, an improvement in recovery, and also you get some improvements in the ability to perform activities of daily living. The nice thing is too, when we talk about the brain, there's some improvements in memory and cognition in the elderly population. So in summary, 99% of the benefits are creatine plus exercise, but there are still a very small body of evidence to suggest that you can still get some benefits. I think if you're coming out of surgery or going into surgery, I think astronauts in space flight, accelerated muscle loss, or any other specific population, you've already talked about the GLPs. I think that's a huge area for creatine to be introduced to offset muscle wasting when you're losing body mass. So there's a lot of potential areas, but definitely creatine from a rehabilitation perspective is highly purported.
Okay. So I guess the other question I would have is if somebody is too debilitated that they're not actually exercising, can it help?
Minimally, but it can potentially to get you back to potentially being more mobile. So, Peter Hespel, who's a retired individual now on creatine research, he did an elegant study on immobilization and then retraining. And creatine really seemed to speed up the muscle memory, so to speak, during the rehabilitation perspective. So, if I knew someone going in for ACL surgery, I would advise creatine before the surgery and then definitely at a higher dose post to sort of synthesize and get the body back into recovery mode.
Hmm. How about electrical stimulation in this atrophied patients? I mean, it would make sense, I guess. I mean, if they're, it's better to do that with creatine than just taking their creatine alone. I mean,
Yeah,
I
it
guess
certainly won't hurt. We don't really know, but any
what
stimulation to the muscle, especially type 2 fibers, creatine may have some small but advantageous effects in certain populations.
And by going, I mean, I'm just recalling all the information that you just already flooded me with. The hydration is another important because another thing is, and I haven't found absolutely anything because this is a recurring question. Okay, hydration, intravascular volume, or whatever, and
Right.
hypertension.
Yes.
There's this thing that people with hypertension, which I'm like, yeah, 80% of the United States should not be taking creatine. So what's your take on that one?
Yeah, anybody who is diagnosed hypertension, and if they're on different types of medications, there's a little bit of caution, but as the current body of evidence stands now, there's no greater adverse effects of creatine compared to placebo on elevating symptoms of hypertension. Now, keep in mind where creatine is osmotic, it does cause a net increase in fluid retention, i.e., water. That can cause some very small potential fluctuations in net body water and/or blood pressure. We're not seeing any effects on aldosterone or antidiuretic hormone specifically, but anybody with hypertension, again, please talk to your medical doctor. Make sure the dose of creatine is low and in the recommended area so that it doesn't cause any net positive fluctuations.
But is there any evidence, like 5 millimeters of mercury or anything? Because I haven't found anything. I have not absolutely anything. So
We just
the
put out another paper called Myths and Misconceptions about Creatine Part 2, and in there, Dr. Phil Chillibeck looked at the section on blood pressure and concluded that there was no greater adverse effects compared to placebo.
my take is like the stress that people have in a daily basis or their poor sleep impacts their blood pressure far worse than this creatine could. So that's my take, and for people that has this thing. So let me see. And so since I guess this segment that I had here was more muscle health and exercise, but how about now that I actually spoke about sleep, there has been an interesting publication on that one, and I think in the medical community or those that have the night shift, but taking some creatine actually has shown some interesting things. How about is it the day prior if you're gonna be I mean, if you're already expecting that you're gonna have a night, like overnight, you're gonna be awake, or So what's the deal with this, and when should I take it? If I know that I'm on call, should I be taking creatine? What's the take on this one?
I think this is one of the most exciting areas. So I was part of that study where we looked at menstruating young females with sleep and taking about 5 grams of creatine for multiple weeks. And again, they were exercising twice a week. They got an extra hour of sleep duration compared to placebo. And you know, everybody on the planet would pay a lot of money to get an extra hour of sleep. You as a medical doctor, you know, you're sleep deprived most days. But that leads into another area. The most robust, emerging, and exciting areas is how creatine can offset symptoms of sleep deprivation. And the theory here is we've already talked about the anti-inflammatory effects. The brain is unlike muscle. The brain has its blood-brain barrier, so it prevents a lot of things from getting in circulation. And one of those, unfortunately, is creatine. But the argument is, well, that makes sense because the brain is also the only other organ that makes its own creatine. So if you're getting adequate sleep, a young individual, you know, adequate diet, the brain is making enough creatine to maintain and your cognitive function. But I don't know anybody on the planet that doesn't go through multiple bouts of metabolic stress, primarily from a brain standpoint, each day. The dog wakes up at 2 in the morning. You are working a 36-hour shift. You have to fly to Germany. There's so many things, and coffee can only come to the rescue. So the biggest focus area right now is on creatine and brain health, or from the neck up. And there's some good news. Creatine can get through the blood-brain barrier. It's very slow, but it can accumulate over time. That does elevate brain creatine stores. And then if the brain has more creatine, it recycles ATP just like muscle quicker. But the nice thing is we're starting to see, primarily from animal models, it decreases oxidative stress or inflammation when the brain is really taxed. So you think of jet lag, sleep deprivation, university students staying up all night, aging, accelerated aging. So that's starting to where we're starting to see creatine have benefits. Concussion in children, creatine has been shown to have some effects there as well. The only issue with the brain is we propose that you need longer dosing than muscle and a higher dose. And that's where you probably, as we talked about originally, I've now moved from muscle about 3 to 5 grams a day all the way up to over 10 grams a day from a whole body perspective.
So you take 10 grams a day?
That's a minimum. When I'm flying to Europe, it's 20 grams during the week. And I've certainly noticed now I'm a very creatine type of researcher, but when I take 20 grams a day, I've come back from Europe twice now, and I haven't had nearly the same amount of jet lag as I usually do. I'm an N of 1, but I've noticed when I take a high dose, but you made a really good point. Should you take it only on the days you know you're going to be metabolically stressed? You have no idea with a crystal ball. So I think the good thing is creatine should be taken daily. The safety profile of creatine monohydrate is exceptional. If you only want to start with 3 grams a day, I'm totally fine with that. You just need to have a lot more patience. If you want to get muscle, potentially bone and brain benefits, I think you need a little bit more. The lowest dose to have brain benefits is 4 grams a day, and they measured it at 3 and 6 months, but that population had long COVID. And so now when you get into clinical populations, slightly more, up to 5 grams a day, has been shown to have beneficial effects in those with clinical depression, but they were also taking methamphetamines as well. So there hasn't been a study looking at creatine by itself, but a lower dose, which is often recommended, I'm fine with that. You just might need to have a little bit more patience. But devil's advocate, if you're a young, healthy individual getting 8 hours of sleep a night, great diet, exercising, if you take creatine, it's not going to have any beneficial effects from a cognitive perspective. We've looked at 10 and 20 grams a day in young university students that were not stressed, no effects. I think the populations or times when you're metabolically stressed is when the brain says, I need help. Whatever I'm making is not enough. I might need more help. But in my case, I never know when a metabolic stressor is coming up. So why not have that safety reservoir when the times do come up?
Yeah, the way I would see it is, I mean, the college final exams, you know that you're gonna be sleep deprived. Well, you don't know. That's if you suck that you didn't prepare for the exam or whatever. But if you're gonna do a 3 a.m. and you're not gonna be sleeping well, hey, it's not gonna hurt for you to actually start preparing
Now,
with this.
And 100% agree. We don't have a lot of safety or adverse data on the brain. We don't expect there to be any. but again, I'm not seeing any downward effects. There's a wide range of dosages an individual can take. I think you would start as little as 3 grams and work your way up. But a really important point here is a landmark study came out of Germany last year, and they used MRS, so like basically an MRI for the brain. They gave 25 grams in one bolus dose, so a super high amount, and they gave it to young individuals who volunteered to be sleep deprived for 21 hours. And when they measure brain imaging scan and measures of functionality, the individuals who took the high dose of creatine, not only did they have elevated amounts of creatine in the brain, but the next day during 21 hours of sleep deprivation, they had improvements in memory and cognition compared to placebo. So that has huge applications moving forward for today's society. I think people are very sleep deprived, over caffeinated. They're taking a lot of poor types of food, ultra processed. A lot of people are probably taking, nicotine, smoking, alcohol, whichever it is. All of these are very toxic, very inflammatory. Creatine seems to have a preservation effect. It's not a huge effect, but it is there.
So yeah, something is yeah. You mentioned nicotine, which is another one because I mean, there's like more and more people are not talking about nicotine and how the powder. I was like, holy
Yeah.
cow!
And before I leave this, I think I'd be remiss to not talk about that landmark study that just came out a few months ago in Alzheimer's disease.
Mm.
It was a single label, but they took 20 grams a day for 8 straight weeks. And that had improvements in one of the most catastrophic diseases known to human physiology. So those individuals were about 70 years of age, but with diagnosed Alzheimer's, they did have improvements. So we're really excited about the potential for down the road large scale trials with Alzheimer's.
Well, I mean, without knowing, we jumped into the brain and cognitive function, which I mean, it's like we touched upon. I think that the most important and relevant points that the people that the audience had,
Right.
and I guess that with the Alzheimer's one, so it's 20 grams that they were taking
Yep.
per day for 8 weeks, and there was an improvement there in their memory. That's really cool.
Yes.
Another thing that I also read about is a potential role in, of course, I mean, since it's brain and I mean, right now the mental health, depression, anxiety, and PTSD.
Yes.
What
Yeah.
what about those?
Yeah, so there's been a few studies by a big group out of Utah, and they've looked at clinical depression and primarily in young females, and 5 grams a day there seemed to have some beneficial effects in combination with medication. And then there was another study with CBT therapy, and creatine was better than placebo there. So the effects are emerging. I think creatine from anxiety, PTSD, or depression is one small tool in the multifactorial toolbox. But it's very interesting in the study I was alluding to out of Utah, when they looked at the MRS studies with the brain. When the individuals took creatine, the symptoms came down. When they went off creatine, the symptoms of depression went up. So creatine acts as a brain bioenergetic. A common denominator with concussion, Alzheimer's, and depression is likely a reduction in their baseline creatine. So maybe supplementation is bringing those required levels back up, if not more, for a slight reservoir. So I think clinical depression, anxiety, and PTSD, ADHD, all of those will be areas of focus groups from the psychiatry groups worldwide. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we've got there the brain and cognition, so we've got that. There's other ones. I think we can jump into we've got bone health. I've got.
Yep.
I mean, I'm I mean, I don't give me a let's do this because I don't know how your time is, and there's just so many. Let's go with the women's health
Yeah.
and kids. I
Yes.
was deeply interested with
Mhm.
that, and what I have here is that women typically have lower baseline creatine levels than men. Would that be to say that they need lower levels or lower dosage, or that they're gonna be maybe even having a better response like the vegans?
Yeah, that estimate, I was part of that paper as well, is based on very, very limited studies. So although it's there, other groups have shown that there's no sex differences between intramuscular and or baseline creatine stores. But on average, what we're starting to see is that biological females synthesize less, and they might have a little bit less creatine stores, primarily in skeletal muscle. We don't know anything in the brain or bone. So they might be responsive to creatine just like aging individuals as we get older. Now, The nice thing about the focus shifting from biological males to females, because females were so underrepresented, is that we're starting to see profound benefits from muscle mass to performance. Of course, bone health was a big area, and then now getting into some of the sex differences in the brain. So, if any of the females are watching, creatine is just not for males anymore. If you understand the physiology of it, it can have effects. The big area that we've seen the most robust evidence was in postmenopausal females, and that's primarily from a bone health perspective. There's not a lot of great research in that area, but a few clinical trials have shown in postmenopausal females a higher dose, about 8 to 12 grams, decreased bone mineral density loss in the hip. So that is crucial for potentially offsetting hip fracture. But it also seemed to increase lean mass and bone strength and area in the lower limbs in males and females 50 years and above. So I think as we get into the middle ages, 50, 60 and above, exercise has to be there. But creatine may not just have muscle effects, it could have some bone benefits in certain populations.
What would you say to a woman that tells you that she does not want to take creatine because she doesn't want to turn muscular and look like a man, or that they're gonna swell up? Well, what's your take on that one?
Yeah, I first off, it's not a steroid. It was a myth. Creatine is just something that's very similar to protein. And if you take a recommended dose, 3 to 5 grams a day or slightly higher, you're not going to get hardly any water retention or GI tract issues. Those primarily only come with the loading phase. I think anybody listening that's curious about creatine, just take a small amount on a daily basis, see how you do, and you can progress with your dose over time. But unfortunately, no, you're not going to get super big and bulky with creatine. The interesting thing with creatine, it does not, and let me repeat this, it does not increase the rates of protein synthesis. I think that's going to be a big surprise for people. Whey protein and other proteins do. Creatine works in other ways to support a muscle growth environment. So, no, creatine only has small effects on muscle growth. It has more effects on performance. So, for someone saying, I don't want to take creatine to get big and bulky, they might be considering taking too large of a dose, that water retention during about the first 10 days. So, lower the dose. You can do microdosing, a couple grams in the morning, afternoon, and evening. That seems to help as well.
So when we're talking about, is it something visual if you're doing the loading dose? Are they, I mean, can women, I mean, feel it, see it? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like,
Well, so the some of the anecdotal things we see is that my clothes feel tighter,
gotcha.
or when I go on the scale and I went up 4 or 5 pounds. And again, that's typically with the loading phase. Now, the issue for
Balance of fluid retention, that's the first one for me. Really, that much?
you can, depends on the individual, but now with biological females, then you introduce the different phases of the menstrual cycle. So water retention during follicular luteal can influence the net water retention. So for biological females, we typically say start at a lower, more frequent dose. And then when we've done that, we don't see the effect over time.
Wow. So, anybody thought about getting diuretics with taking creatine?
No, because it poses the hydration effect of creatine. That's right.
That's, I didn't know that it was that much. I mean, honestly, that's so. Once you did the loading dose and you, let's say you gained 5 pounds, what? After that, you start losing that water?
Yeah, because then you reduce it down to about 2 to 5 grams a day. And the cool thing is the weight that you started with and finished, it might go up by about 1 kilogram at most. And hopefully that is muscle mass. The other nice thing with creatine for your listeners is we've done two elegant meta-analysis now is that creatine increases fat loss, a very small amount, but it increases fat loss. So if the number on the scale fluctuates a bit, we theorize muscle or lean mass went up, fat came down, so that might be the difference on the scale.
And you know what? I forgot to mention because we did speak about the GLPs. I mean, I'll go back to this, but the GLPs was something very important. I was speaking with Darren before we even started this thing, and we jumped. And I want all of you that are doing your semaglutide, your tirzepatide, your dulaglutide, your GL, blah 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 blah. First, number one. If you, I always tell people, like, if you got your semaglutide in the Botox parlor, I mean, you're doing it wrong. I can already guarantee you, you're not. So the point here is one of the biggest issues with GLPs is muscle loss. So I was speaking with Aaron about this. Is you, I mean, it's not like it's an indication there, but it's just, I would say, common sense. You have to take creatine at least 5 grams per day, take your protein or eat enough protein, and do weights. You have to do weightlifting in order not to start losing muscle, which you're gonna regret at the end. So, I mean, for me, I mean, it's not an indication, as I said, but personally, you're a patient of mine. You're taking a GLP. I'm giving you a GLP. You have to be lifting weights. You have to be taking creatine, and you have to be taking enough protein, ingesting it. If you're not eating it, you're gonna be taking your shake. So,
Yeah, right.
and then just wanted to mention that because we didn't touch about it. So, women, and then what if we have the interesting thing that you pregnancy? Like what?
Yes.
So yeah, tell us about that one. That's because I mean, as I said, the women here is like, oh, creatine. The first thing that they're gonna go is the GYN is gonna go, boom. Let's take the creatine. We it's not good for you to know. So what's the info here?
Yeah, so I'm just obviously the messenger of this research, and anybody that is thinking of pregnancy, obviously a caution, talk to your medical practitioner. But as it currently stands, and this work comes from Stacey Ellery's lab in Australia, she's looked at the spiny mouse and the sheep model, and they're starting to see some beneficial effects of creatine from a bioenergetics perspective, having beneficial effects, almost creating a more favorable environment for fetal development. And then the translation is, can creatine cause beneficial effects to breast milk into fetal development and the placenta? And she's starting to see some emerging areas there. The mechanisms we're not exactly sure. I think anti-inflammatory or inflammation is there. But I'm very excited because we just met with Stacy in Munich in March at the creatine conference, and she's starting to now do the first trial on mothers to look at the effects during pregnancy and some of the effects. So stay tuned. In the next 5 years, I think pregnancy, anti-cancer for sure will be another huge topic. I think the accelerated interest in females across the lifespan, and of course, cognition will be the other main area. Yeah.
But nothing to do with what we're just talking about, right? But is there any data or any evidence with the anti-inflammatory properties with skin health, meaning like acne or anything like
Yeah,
that?
nothing really. The area there with skin health was around DHT, but there's nothing that was focused. I remember a few commercial grade creams came out with creatine, but they never really lasted. So again, there's nothing theorized there. You move into children and adolescents, and good colleagues of the United States have looked at many reviews looking at recommended dosages of creatine and concluded it's very similar to the average individual. It has profound exercise and sport benefits, no adverse effects reported to date. And in the only study to look at concussion was actually in children in Scotland, and they gave 0.4 grams per kilogram, and they had a lot of improvements post head trauma. So I think there's application there as well. Again, any of the parents watching, if you're not sure about creatine, you can message me. I could send you those review articles, talk to your medical practitioner. But at the end of the day, they're synthesizing creatine. And if you give a small recommended dose of 2 to 5 grams or 0.1 gram per kilogram in those articles, it's concluded to be safe and effective.
Hmm. So if your kid is playing, or if somebody's doing MMA, boxing, or some football, it might be something to dig into, you know?
And I think the other area is children are very picky eaters, and maybe their diet isn't optimal, and they might not be getting enough creatine. And Haynes data says about 1 gram for bone, cognitive development, and things like that from childhood into adolescence. So, if they're not eating very well, very processed food, not eating a lot, that's where the parent may consider a health supplement, and maybe creatine is one of those ingredients.
So not a medical recommendation, but let's say this is going to be for my personal use with my kids. What's the dose? Yeah.
So the lowest dose that we see from food is about 1 gram. That'll offset some of the detrimental potentials. But you can take, 2 to 5 grams. In the paper, I would recommend on the size of the person. So 0.1 gram per kilogram. So if the child is only 30 kilograms, he's taking 3 grams. If he's 50 kilograms, he's taking a 5. But I think start very small. 2 to 3 grams is plenty in addition to their food. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, since we were talking about water, I mean, this would go into the myths and the misconceptions, but I think it's a good point because I mentioned diuretics and blah blah blah. So there's also this concept which I kind of hate, and it's that creatine screws up your kidneys.
Okay. Yeah.
So what about that one?
Yeah, it's probably the biggest myth. It's been robustly refuted many, many times. And the interesting thing here is, yes, the kidneys is the organ that has the first synthesis step in the biosynthesis of creatine. However, we're not seeing any greater strain on the kidneys in healthy individuals, even those that have predisposed kidney issues. So that is generally missed, and we've looked at many randomized control trials, wrote many systematic reviews on this, and it's not having any detrimental effects, not only on renal but liver function.
So I saw something about the GFR being below 60
Yeah,
in that situation that you just it's like look, just be a little bit careful. It seems more like to cover somebody's butt than somebody being concerned that this is going to screw the kidney.
right.
But the other thing is that creatine goes and is when it's metabolized, it goes to creatinine, and that's what we see. We see a rise in the creatinine, and automatically the knee jerk reaction is like, you see, you're taking this, it's damaging your kidneys.
Sorry.
And the point is that that's not the way that you should be measuring
Right.
the kidney function in that situation. So
Right.
for those that are concerned that creatine could be screwing up your kidneys
Yep.
or that your creatinine went up, because I've had those cases where
Oh,
they stopped it. It's like by the physician and stuff.
I usually recommend anybody taking supplementation, make sure you tell your nephrologist or GP you're on supplementation, because once creatine gets in skeletal muscle, it becomes locked. It's too large. And as you pointed out, it gets metabolized as creatinine. And then people say, oh, I'm a blood requisition form. My doctor checked that off. And right before or below it, it has EGFR estimated. So it's like a filter. If creatinine is elevated, that's an indication of a false positive that your kidneys are not filtering it out properly. So please tell your doctor you're on supplementation. It's highly logic that your creatinine will be slightly elevated and your EGFR will be suppressed. And again, a lot of times people say, oh, I was forced to go off creatine, and we found out it was just from the metabolism of the molecule.
I was seeing something about the how to measure the GFR and measuring cystatin C and another.
That's another way. Yes, it's a merging area. It doesn't consider the fluctuations there, but not a lot of labs will do that. Yeah.
So the point to this is for all you people that are asking about this damaging your kidneys, there's no evidence that supports that myth. So you just have to speak with your PCP or your doctor and let them know what you're doing. Of course, I can guarantee you that that doctor is going to feel uncomfortable when he sees your rising creatinine, but that's up to you. You can educate them. I mean, I'm always happy to learn from my patients, but there's other special doctors that they get pissed. So that's up to you guys. That's up to your physician, you know. Um, so we've got that bone health.
Mhm.
We touched lightly about this once, but so there's also, I mean, if do I recall correctly, I mean, there's also does it interfere on osteoclasts and bone demineralization, or what's the deal with creatine here?
Yeah, so that's also like the anti-catabolic effect. So with bone, the best lines of evidence is sort of an anti-resorptive agent like a bisphosphonate. So the theory here is with you have osteoblasts and osteoclasts cycling all throughout the day. Osteoblasts are involved in bone formation. Osteoclasts are involved in bone breakdown. And we've done a study looking at a surrogate marker of bone breakdown and teal peptides, and creatine reduced that marker as well. And it's been shown repeatedly in other labs. So the theory here is we don't think creatine will build up bone, but it may make the bone stronger or more resistant to breakdown as you get older. So could that have applications for reducing fracture when you get into the seventh, eighth decades? Could it have application for reducing frailty? The theory is there. We need a lot of data to actually measure it, but there's been a few randomized control trials on high dose creatine and exercise having some bone benefits.
Okay, cool. Let me see. And we go here to the next one, which is myths and misconceptions. So
Right.
um, we spoke about some people are questioning, well, does it increase fat mass? And you already mentioned
No,
this.
it's the other way. It decreases it very small amount, but it is a decrease. Yeah.
And the other one that we had is hypertension, which we talked about. I
Right.
mean, really, no. I mean, your stress, your poor sleep is likely worsening that one. This is another beautiful one.
Yeah.
Hair loss.
Yeah. And not sure if anybody can see me, but I'm the worst case for this. But this is a very this is the number one myth, I think, even more than renal function. So the landmark study from South Africa looking at rugby study or players 2 decades ago simply showed that about 25 grams of creatine caused an increase in DHT or dihydroxytestosterone, which is a precursor for hair loss and hair follicle thinning. And no measure of hair was done in that study. Just the hormone went up, albeit within the normal physiological range. But people sort of took that and went crazy and saying, "Oh, I can't take creatine because I'm going to go bald." And only this year did the study finally get published, where the individuals took creatine for several weeks. This was in young males, and no adverse effects. So it was the first study to show that there is no evidence that creatine decreases hair thinning, hair follicle loss, or leads to baldness. They also looked at hormones and no effect there as well. So the interesting thing is, I believe it was 5 grams compared to that previous study with a very high dose of 25 grams. So the nice thing is there, we're not seeing any real evidence that creatine causes hair loss. I was going bald way before I started taking creatine, so there's no correlation and causation.
Um,
But it is still the number one myth that you get asked every day. It's unbelievable, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and it's like it's funny because it's the guy, it's the dude that is injecting testosterone that is asking you, see if the creatine is
Yep.
gonna go, they can go bald, you know. So let's see that one. Do we really need a loading phase?
You do not need a loading phase. It's very rapid if someone's in a hurry for some reason, but you can take a low dose. The lowest dose, about 3 grams, takes about 28 days to get to the same level as the loading phase. So the answer there is you do not need a loading phase. You also don't need to cycle it. You can take creatine on a daily basis for several years if you like.
Okay. So it just depends there. I mean, we've spoken about different populations. We've spoken about women. We've spoken about pregnancy. This is not medical recommendation. It's medical information. So it's up to you to read a little bit more about that stuff.
And the other one goes with that. The timing is irrelevant. You can take creatine at whatever's the most convenient for you.
Okay. Um, and well, the other one is there's concern about creatine affecting liver health. How about
Oh,
that
yeah.
one?
No effects whatsoever. Rick Ryder put out a massive review looking at renal and liver function, and there's no greater adverse effect compared to placebo.
Okay, there you go. And the other thing is that creatine, I love that one. That the only reason that you get, I mean, is like you look more muscular because just you're retaining fluid. But we'll, so I mean,
Yeah, no, there's really, I mean, we put on lean mass, regional muscle size, and maybe the bone is getting a little bit stronger there. So, um, there's an increase in fluid or water retention, which is great for the muscle environment, but you are actually putting on dry muscle mass in a small amount.
okay. And so here, I guess we're getting to the practical guidance almost at the end of this stuff. So we spoke about different dosages, and I guess, I mean, this, of course, as I said, it's not medical recommendation. But let's say what dose, if you were to take it in a, so let's say you're a young guy that you want to develop muscle, or you're a marathon runner, or you have a family member that has Alzheimer, like how likely would you be, and what dose, what would you be exploring?
Yeah, I would start with 3 grams a day and take that for about 7 days to see how you feel on it. I think it's really important
For who?
for anybody. I think I would start as little as 3 grams a day, see how you feel on it, and then after about 7 days, then I would work my way up to 5, 6, up to 10 grams a day. It's not a sprint. I think this is a marathon. Now, if you need a sprint and you say, "Wow, I just found out that I qualified for some big race or whichever," then I would do the loading phase. So it comes down to the context, but I think the average person needing help, you could do 3 grams. But if you're diagnosed with Alzheimer's or another catastrophic disease, cancer, then I would go much higher. So again, it comes down that I would go to 20, 30 grams a day to try to
30. That's, I mean, is there anything? I got, I've seen 20. I haven't seen 30.
Yeah. Oh god, they've been doing high dose in Parkinson's disease for many years up at high doses, and I think you're going to start to see really super physiological doses that we're not used to in certain conditions. So go back to the Alzheimer's study; they did 20 grams a day for 8 straight weeks. Usually, it's 20 grams a day for 7 days, and then they reduce it to five. So they really wanted to see the get into the brain. Since the safety profile is exceptional, I think that question really comes down to context. The average person versus someone who really needs a quick boost to a medical condition, I think that would determine the dose, yeah.
Wow. Um, 30. Jeez. So did they drink it or did they eat it?
No, they can combine it in multiple dosages through time. So if you take 0.3 grams per kilogram, which is like some individuals now are 80, 90, 100 kilograms. So there you go. You're getting up to the 30 range, yeah.
Wow.
And I know some NFL players are taking over 50 grams, 50, but they're so large. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So let's put a scenario in which we have I don't know, a 70-kilogram lady, and she's got Alzheimer's,
Okay.
and she's got, I don't know, a little bit of kidney disease, stage 2, stage 3. Would you go for 20? Or I
No,
mean,
that's an interesting.
I'm not telling you that this is a medical recommendation. I would say, let's say this is your cousin.
Yeah.
Yeah, would you? So what would you do there? Like
Yeah,
do
I
that?
think I would probably start a bit lower, and I would probably do the titration amount of 0.1 gram per kilogram or see how the individual is doing with the kidney. If there's no progression, and we're not seeing any evidence that creatine is going to cause an increase in progression. If anything, individuals with dialysis or chronic kidney disease actually benefit from creatine. Then you would go to that dose that's a little bit closer to the 20 grams that's been shown this year at the University of Kansas and monitor that from a medical perspective.
And so there's no contraindication in end-stage renal disease dialysis patients to take creatine?
There potentially can be in combination with either medication or other things like that. So the medical doctor would have to say, okay, this is the best prescription. But as it currently stands, we're not seeing any greater adverse or prevalence from kidney or liver function compared to placebo.
I mean, I guess the only issue would be possibly in what's floating around, and it's going to be cleared by the machine. I mean, because you cannot fry your kidneys. So
100%. That's right.
benefits. How's this is a good question. So, I mean, and probably it's going to be hard, but how soon can a particular person see benefits after taking creatine?
I think from a muscle performance perspective, if you took 20 grams a day, you could probably get benefits in a few days.
Wow.
But the most logical is in a few weeks. But we see benefits after 20 grams a day for that loading phase. And I know the earliest is about 3 days. And that's a muscle performance or recovery. But from a muscle growth perspective, you need several weeks of training to see those effects.
Okay. Alrighty. And in case of, well, we spoke about the jet lag or whatever, and I mean, it's something that, I mean, there's really no research here. He said, and like it's like anecdotal or personal experience, but
That's right.
it would not hurt if you already know that you're gonna be on call and you're not gonna sleep. Maybe taking 20 grams might be. But you, by the way, can you chuck down 20 just like that and you don't have any issues? You?
Yeah, I was gonna say if you're gonna do a higher dose, you might want to do multiple 5 gram
Yeah.
dosages for more consistency and palatability. That study in Germany, they did give a super big dose, but I don't think that's very consistent on a daily basis, taking 20, 25 grams. There's some evidence to suggest it can cause some slight adverse effects. We talked about jittery and anxiety, depending on the pathology of the person, but I think you want to take multiple smaller dosages.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I tried like 15 at like just one, and I did feel nauseated. Like, I know,
Yeah,
so, but well, I mean, I guess it's you have to be developing your threshold for that
correct.
one. Um, and what else? I mean, I think those were and well, I guess you already touched upon this, which is very interesting. So, incoming or things that areas of research that you're excited about today. You mentioned cancer. Anything else that like what?
Yeah, the pregnancy and anti-cancer or cancer treatment is a huge one of interest. I think females across the lifespan from pregnancy all the way up to those postmenopausal years. And then, of course, the other area is neurological diseases and the brain health, I think, are the big areas to look forward to.
Well, that's awesome. I think we have touched upon almost every single question now that people could have doubts, and the point to doing this episode was to have an expert because I mean I think there's a lot of content that has already been done in English. Of course, this is in English, but I'm
Yeah.
gonna be trying to translate it for the Hispanic community and to understand that everything that you've been hearing in in social media, in TikTok, your hair loss, or you cannot take it because it's gonna damage your kidneys and blah blah blah. It's all a bunch of bull. This is one of the safest, I could say, supplements out there with the most over 680 studies, or maybe even more than that,
I
right?
think there's over 1,000 publications, and we do consider it the safest, most effective ergogenic aid. Yes.
So there you go. Well, Darren, any last recommendations you want to? I mean, of course, you. This is just a part of your research,
Yeah.
which makes anything else that gets you excited, like creatine, any other supplement or any other lifestyle modification that you that I mean that you see a lot of potential.
Yeah, I think the manipulation with the great work of like Stu Phillips' lab and Nick Bird's with the manipulation on training load. I think a lot of times we either said we only could lift heavy, and now look at the evolution where you can lift lighter but just do more repetition. So I like the manipulation in training, but I kind of always use the analogy that exercise is the cake, sleep is the chocolate icing, and then protein is the sprinkles, and maybe creatine might be that little cherry on top that might make it a little more attractive. But at the end of the day, sleep and exercise to me are so foundational. Without those, none of these drugs and supplements per se will work. You can have, if you don't have adequate sleep, there's only so much caffeine you can take. And we all know that exercise, I think, anyway, is the fountain of youth. And if there's some nutrients that can help, and I think creatine is one of those tools in the toolbox, the evidence-based research is supporting it for the most part. I think it's those four areas that you consider. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, and Darren, where can people find you? I mean, if they're, I mean, I know that you just put your name and you're gonna be all over YouTube, but if do you? I mean, I'm not sure if you like any I don't know, I wouldn't say consults, but I mean, do people contact you for you to give them recommendations and stuff like this?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of people ask me about medical advice, which I'm unqualified for. But if they want to follow me on Instagram at Dr. Darren Kando, I try to put out a lot of health research, and if I have time to answer as many questions as possible. So Instagram seems to be the most available source to get me out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I apologize for the technical issue, but I'll be stitching this up and make that seamless. And really, thank you so much for giving us your clarification, your knowledge. And well, maybe we can do this in the future with the new advancements, which I'm pretty sure it's going to be very exciting.
Right. No, thanks for having me and look forward to it. Thank you.
Alrighty. Have a good one, Darren.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
La creatina es segura, lo dice la investigación. No te truena los riñones, eso es puro pinche mitotón. Está en la carne y pescado, pero en polvo rinde más. Te da fuerza y resistencia y el fierro se levanta en paz. Que te chinga los riñones, no le hagas caso a la güera pendeja. La creatina es segura y la ciencia siempre lo refleja. Queda calvicie que engorda, que hasta el pito va a fallar. Puras mamadas en redes, esa gente ni sabe entrenar. 5 gramos todito los días, no ocupa ciclos ni descansar. Échale polvo diario, compadre, y hasta el otro polvo va a durar. No le hagas caso a TikTok, ni al mitote de la raza. Que la creatina ayuda y hasta el cerebro le da grasa. Sirve pa' fuerza y deporte, recupera más cabrón. No es dopaje ni es magia, es pura ciencia, mi chingón. Así que escuchen mi raza, no hagan caso al chisme